Okay, so we are live. Let me share the screen. Okay, so our POTD is buy two chocolates. So we have been given a price array and total amount of money we have, and in a price array we have the n number of chocolates with prices according to the indices, and we need to buy at least two, and we need to check that either we can buy at least two chocolates, either we can buy two chocolates or not. So how we can approach this problem? For example, we have been given a price array and amount of money equal to 3, which we have been given, and if we buy the first two chocolates, then our total cost will be 3, and money left will be total cost equal to money left will be money minus total cost, which will be equal to 0. So we can buy two chocolates on our this test case, and in our second test case we have been given a price at 3, 2 and 3, and money equal to 3. And if we see that can we buy two chocolates or not, in this question we can't buy two chocolates, we can only buy a single chocolate. Either we can buy a chocolate at index 1, or at index 0, or at index 2, and so we can't buy two chocolates, so we just need to simply return the total number of money that was given to us. If we can buy two chocolates, then we need to return the money left by buying the two chocolates. We can write this. First of all, we can just simply sort our prices array, and then we can simply check if our if we can buy the first chocolates of the smallest cost that's there. If the cost of the first two chocolates is greater than money, then we can simply return our money, else we can just simply return the money left. Okay, so let's try running it. POTD. Okay, so now over to you now.
See, guys, the question that we have been asked in today's GFG PODT is that there is an array that is given to us, and size of the array is n. And now there are two players that are playing a game in this array, and the game that they are playing is that they can remove any single element from the array, any single element from the array. But the condition is that if they remove an element, okay, and the remaining element that are available in the array, if their zor, if we do the zor of all the remaining element that are available in the array, once the player remove his element, if that zor becomes 0, then that player lose. Okay, you understand, this is just this simple game what we are playing. So let's say there are four elements in here. Okay, let's just assume whatever it may be. It can be A, B, C, D, whatever it is. Okay, so initially there is a zor that we have done, and let's say it is not equals to 0. Now what is happening is the player 1 will come and he pick this one and he remove this array. Now I have to figure out the zor of the remaining. Is it equals to 0? Let's say it is not. Okay, then the player 2 will come and he will say, you know what, I just wants to delete this one. So we delete this one. Now we check if the zor of these two elements is equals to 0 or not. And let's just say it is not. Then again comes. and he says, you know what, I just wants to remove this element. So player 1 removes this element. Okay, then we are left with only D, and we say, you know what, let's just do XOR of this, and it is also not equal to 0. Then the player 2 comes and he says, you know what, I'm going to remove this element. So player 2 comes and he removes this element. Now, as there are no elements available in the array, so ultimately the XOR will become 0. Therefore, player 2 loses. This is the game that we have to. There is an array that is given to us. There are players that are playing the game. The game is that they are just removing an element from the array, and the player loses the game whose remaining element XOR sum is equals to 0. This is what the game is. Now, before we solve this problem, first of all, you guys have to understand it. What is a XOR table? See, so this is our A, this is our B, and this is our output. If the input element are same, that is both are same, then the output will be 0. If the input element are both same, that is either they are 1 1 or 0 0, but they are both equal, then the output will still be 0. But if the input element are 0, that is in case of A it is 1 and in case of B it is 0, then the output will be 1. And if A is 0 and B is 1, then again the output will be 1. So this is basically the XOR table that we have to consider in this case. Okay. Now guys, let's just look at the situation where player 1 wins and situation where player 2 wins. Okay. Now let's just assume that the size of the array is odd. Okay. That is that n is odd. Now this is the key of how we are actually going to solve this problem. So let's say these are the array elements 1, 2 and 3. Okay, and we do this all of them 1 2 and 3, and we figure out, you know what, it is not equals to 0. Let's just assume it is not equals to 0. Okay, so the player A comes, that is the player first come, and he simply remove this element. Okay, then we do the XOR of this, and as we know it is also not equals to 0. Therefore now player B comes, and as he comes he simply remove this element. Now only 3 is available. We do the XOR of 3 and it is also not equal to 0. Therefore player A comes again. And now when player A removes this array element, the array will become empty. And for an empty array, XOR is also equals to 0. Therefore, what? A loses. Now understand, here the size of the array was odd. Therefore, A loses. That is player 1 loses. Okay, now let's just consider the case where our player 2 will lose. So let's say there are 4 elements available, 1 2 3 4, and initially we figure out, you know what, their XOR is not equals to 0. So player A comes and he simply remove this element. Then for the remaining element we do the XOR and we find out, you know what, it is also not equals to 0. Then player B comes and he simply remove this one. Then we do again the XOR of these two elements and we find out these are not 0. So then again player A comes and he simply remove this one. 4 is there, XOR of 4 is not equal to 0. Therefore now player B comes and he simply remove this element. Now once he remove this element, the whole array becomes empty. It is empty. And we know that the XOR of empty is what? Equals to 0. So therefore, in this case, player B loses. You seeing the case now? In this case, player B loses. So there are two cases that we are looking in this scenario. One case is that our n is odd, and one case is that where our n is even. Okay. Now when the case is that n is odd, okay, and XOR, if I do the XOR of all the elements that are within my array, if they are not equal to 0 and n is odd, And if the elements are not equal to 0, then simply means that A loses. And when n is even and the array element sum is not equal to 0, array element as or is not equal to 0, then simply B loses. So this is the ultimate logic behind this case. Now we can see another situation. So let's say the array elements are 3 to 3. Okay. Now if I do the XOR of this, I'm not going to get 0. So what I did is, the player 2 comes and he simply say, you know what, I am going to remove this element. Player A comes and he removes this one. Now we are left with 2 and 3. And if I do the XOR of this, what I'm going to get is not 0. Therefore, player B comes and he simply remove this one. Okay, 3 is left. Player A comes and he removes this one. The array becomes empty. Therefore, our player A loses. Now here is another case. Let's say the array only contains even numbers. Now this is the case we are considering here, okay, where the array only contains even number. Now you can see this is an edge case in this scenario, because till now the cases that we have observed is the cases that where n is odd, okay, and XOR of whole array is not equal to 0, then what? Player 1 loses. Okay, if n is even and XOR of the whole array is not equal to 0, then player 2 loses. But now here comes the edge case that we have to consider in this problem, and that is, let's just say our array is 2 2 1 1. Now as you can see, here are four elements, both and two of among those elements are same. Now in our XOR table, as per our XOR table, if the values are equal, then the output will be 0. If the values are equal, then the output will be 0. So in this case, if I do the XOR of 2 and 1, I'm going to get what is 0. Similarly, if I do the XOR of 1 and 1, I'm going to get what? 0. And if I do the XOR of 0 and 0, I'm going to get what? 0. So what this means is, even if n is even if n is even, okay, but if the XOR of the whole array is equals to 0, then player 1 loses. Why player 1 loses? Because see, literally, ultimately, the logic was that once I remove an element, and if I remove an element, even if I don't remove anything, ultimately the sum right now is 0. So therefore, from the beginning of the game, A loses. He doesn't need even to remove any element, because he would only get the chance now if the XOR is not equal to 0. So in this case, you can say that XOR is not equal to 0. Why? Because 2 and 2 will be equal to 0 and 1 will remain same. And 1 and 0 XOR will be equals to 1. So is even and the whole XOR sum is equals to 0, then A loses. He doesn't have any kind of chance in this case. So there are two cases in which the player 1 loses. First case is that the size of the array is odd and XOR of all the elements within the array is 0 is not equals to 0, then player 1 loses. Or the size of the array is even but the XOR of the array element is equals to 0, then again player 1 loses. So these are the two conditions in which player 1 is losing, and this is the only condition in which player 2 is losing. And this is what we are going to do in our code. So what we are going to do in our code is that there is a given array that would have been given. Okay. First of all, we are going to check its XOR, whatever it is. Now, if the XOR is equals to 0, that was the first condition, and if n is odd, then what? Player 1 loses. Okay. If XOR is equals to 1, that is, it is not equals to 0, so therefore it is equals to 1, and n is even, You can say here, if the XOR n is even, yeah. So n is even and the XOR is not equals to 0. Therefore, what we are going to say that player 2 loses. And the third condition was what? That if n is odd and XOR is not equals to 0. So let's just make it as even, yeah. And there comes the third condition, which is that when XOR is not equals to 0 and our n is odd, then player 1 loses. So we are just going to comprise these two conditions and thus comprise this condition. What we are going to say, we are going to say that if n percent 2 is not equals to 0, that is it is an odd number, and XOR is also greater than 0, then our 2 wins. In other cases it is our 1 wins. Okay, 1 loses or 2 loses, that is what we can say. So that it would be our answer in this case. Now why we are applying this logic? In this logic we are simply checking that if the given number, as you can see in this case, that if the given number is odd and the value is greater than 0, then simply our 2 wins. Okay, and in the other cases it is our 1 wins. Why so? Because as we have already discussed, this is our array, then other than that 1 loses, or 2 wins or 1 lose. That is what the case in this case is. So let's just submit this code out. So as you can see, it is working perfectly fine. So that was it for today, guys. Today we have solved both GFG and Leetcode POTD. With that, we are going to goodbye to you today. With that, over to you, Shivam.
So yeah guys, thanks for joining with us. We will catch you up tomorrow.